This terrifying story is about a young fisherman named Cat who lived in a coastal area. Every day, Cat would catch fish, selling part of it at the market, while bringing the rest to a brothel to deliver to the kitchen. The brothel was a place of luxury and indulgence. Someone like Cat, poor and ragged, could never afford to spend money there. That was why he agreed to sell his fish at a low price, because there was someone inside whom he longed to see. The madam of the brothel despised him for his filth and poverty. In this brothel, there was a courtesan named Mimi. Every time Cat arrived, she would send flirtatious glances and tease him with her words. But Cat was naive enough to believe it was real. He secretly fell in love with Mimi. Since meeting her, he began to scrimp and save every penny, cutting back on food and necessities. He dreamed that one day he could buy Mimi's freedom and take her as his wife. When Cat finally saved up a sum of money, he brought it to the madam, only to be mocked for having too little. He was thrown out immediately. His beautiful dream shattered, Cat went to a tavern, drinking alone as he wept over his poverty and his unattainable love for Mimi. However, while drinking, he overheard a conversation from a nearby table. Someone had retrieved a corpse from the South Sea and was paid a huge sum for it. Hearing this, Cat began to think, if he didn't go, there was no other way for him to make money. This could be his chance to change his life. Every sailor knew the South Sea was perilous. No one dared venture there. If the violent waves didn't claim them, the sharks would. Yet, with unwavering determination, Cat set out on a small boat, heading straight for the South Sea. His boat drifted for 2 days and 1 night before finally reaching the South Sea. But then, a great storm arose. With just a few monstrous waves, his small boat was torn apart. Cat was a strong swimmer, but even he could not withstand the fury of the ocean. He was dragged into the depths, lost in the vastness of the sea. He thought for sure he was going to die. However, not long after, he slowly opened his eyes and found himself inside an underwater cave. In front of him stood a naked woman, slicing fish on a stone slab. She had gills on her neck, sharp-pointed teeth, webbed fingers, and fins on her back. Wasn't she a mermaid? She could not speak human language, but she cared for Cat with great devotion. However, the fish and shrimp she caught could only be eaten raw. Every once in a while, she would return to the water, as she could not stay on land for too long. Cat was trapped in the cave, spending his days with the mermaid. Though she had a human form, she was clearly not human. Her lower body was a fish's tail and her mouth was filled with razor-sharp teeth. Over time, Cat grew restless and thought about escaping. He suddenly remembered May, who was still waiting for him at the brothel. But returning without money meant he could never buy her freedom. And so, a wicked idea took root in his heart. When the mermaid left the cave, he sneaked out and found a usable boat on the shore. Then, taking advantage of her unawareness, he struck her unconscious. Cat dragged the mermaid onto the boat. After drifting for several days, he finally reached land. Without hesitation, he sold the mermaid, exchanging her for a large sum of silver. The mermaid could only cry in anguish, watching the man she had saved walk away with his fortune. He then bought luxurious clothes and went straight to the brothel. Seeing his wealth, the madam's eyes gleamed with greed, and she agreed to let him take May away. That night, the two found a lavish inn, drinking and celebrating together. After a few cups of wine, Cat began to feel dizzy. He collapsed onto the table, unconscious. As it turned out, May had already had a lover. Seeing Cat suddenly become rich, The two had plotted to rob and kill him. They had secretly drugged his drink, making him lose consciousness before stealing all his silver. Finally, to erase any evidence, they tied him up and threw him into the sea. Cat sank into the water, unable to save himself. When he saw a figure swimming toward him, he thought he was saved. But he did not realize that this mermaid was not as kind as the one before. Instead, it summoned its kin. The entire school of mermaids tore the traitorous cat apart and devoured him. This terrifying story is about a skilled tailor named Leo, who had learned the craft from his grandmother since he was a child. He ran a clothing repair stall on the street, and most of his customers were women. No matter how torn or damaged their clothes were, Leo could sew them back as good as new. Because of his excellent craftsmanship and affordable prices, Leo became very well known in the area. One night, while Leo was working at home, he suddenly heard a knock at the door. When he opened the door, he saw a person, but this person was only as tall as his waist. Looking more closely, Leo stumbled back in horror. The person was holding their own head in front of their chest. The figure wanted Leo to sew their head back onto their neck. Leo didn't dare refuse, so he gathered all his courage, threaded the needle, and began stitching. When he was done, the person was satisfied and left. Before leaving, they promised to repay Leo's kindness someday. After the figure disappeared into the night, Leo collapsed to the ground in fear, his whole body trembling. It was the first time in his life he had encountered a ghost and had to do something so terrifying. A few days later, Leo went out to deliver clothes to his customers and returned home late. As he passed through a mountain road, the chilling night air made his fear grow stronger. Suddenly, from beneath a pond, two water spirits with pitch-black soaked bodies emerged. Leo was so terrified that he couldn't move his legs. In the blink of an eye, the spirits lunged at him, trying to drag him into the water. But before they could succeed, a long-tongued female ghost suddenly rushed out from the forest. Neither side was willing to back down, both fighting over Leo. The hanging ghost wanted to make Leo her replacement. If Leo died, she would finally be free, but he would take her place, hanging from that tree forever. Just when Leo thought his fate was sealed, a figure suddenly appeared. Though terrified, Leo found this person strangely familiar. The newcomer fought off the water spirits and the hanging ghost, saving Leo's life. It turned out that the person who had saved Leo was the very same man who had asked him to sew his head back on a few days earlier. Although still shaken, Leo knew he had to express his gratitude. The man simply replied that he was only repaying Leo's kindness. Then, the man tore a piece of fabric from his own clothing and handed it to Leo, saying that as long as he carried it with him, spirits would not dare to come near. As the fabric touched Leo's hands, the man added, "When I was alive, I killed many people. The resentment within this fabric will help ward off evil." Taking the cloth, Leo bid farewell to the man and turned to leave. After walking a few steps, he glanced back, only to find that the man had vanished into the darkness. From then on, even with a protective charm in his hands, Leo never dared to walk alone at night again. Once upon a time, there was a poor woodcutter named Qingshan. He studied diligently, hoping to pass the imperial examination and become a government official. But his home was too noisy for him to focus. So, he took his books and went deep into the forest behind his house. There, he found an abandoned house. Though old and run down, it was peaceful and quiet. Shan cleaned it up a little and decided to turn it into an ideal place for studying. However, behind the house was a deserted graveyard, which sent chills down one's spine. But Shan didn't mind much. For someone as poor as him, finding such a place was already a blessing. Since the area was filled with forgotten graves, no one ever came by, and he wasn't worried about being disturbed. Shan studied tirelessly, hoping to pass the imperial exam and escape poverty. Day after day, he immersed himself in his studies, but he didn't know how to cook. Often, he read until he was starving, only to collapse on the table and fall asleep. One night, in a half-conscious state, Shan saw a woman carrying a basket enter his house. Startled, he suddenly woke up, but the woman had disappeared without a trace. He glanced around the house, and his eyes landed on the table. There, he saw a basket filled with sweet pastries and fruits. Could the woman have left it for him? Though the food no longer looked fresh, he was starving, so he immediately ate it. From that night on, every time he fell asleep, someone would leave a basket of food on his table. No longer suffering from hunger, Shan began to wonder. Who was this mysterious woman? Why did she come and go so suddenly? Determined to uncover the truth, he pretended to sleep the following night and waited for her. When the woman approached his side, he suddenly sprang up and grabbed hold of her. As he lifted his head to look at her, his jaw dropped in shock. The woman was young and stunningly beautiful, though her face looked slightly weary. She admitted to Shan that she was already dead. Her spirit lingered in the area because she had died too suddenly and couldn't move on. Meeting Shan was a fateful encounter. Feeling sympathy for him, she gathered fruits and offerings left on the graves each day and brought them to him. With teary eyes, she told him that if he was afraid of her, she would never appear before him again. But Shan, deeply moved by her kindness, reassured her that he did not hate her. In fact, he was grateful to her. From then on, the woman appeared every night, taking care of Shan's daily needs. When the imperial examination day arrived, Shan had to travel to the capital for 3 days. The woman told him that if he didn't return within 3 days, she would disappear forever. She begged him to keep his promise. Shan swore that he would return and take her as his wife. On the second day, the results were announced. He had scored among the top. He was even invited to a celebratory banquet. Caught up in the excitement, he drank heavily with his friends. By the time he sobered up, 5 days had passed. He panicked and rushed back to the graveyard. But the woman was nowhere to be found. Desperate, he dug open her coffin, only to find a pile of white bones. Overwhelmed with regret, he realized he had betrayed her trust and lost his one true love. In sorrow, he reburied her remains and left in silence. This terrifying story took place in a mountainous region where a merchant named Liu lived with his stunningly beautiful wife. One day, after being attended to by her maid and nanny, the lady finished bathing and combing her hair, preparing to rest. Suddenly, a stranger appeared in the courtyard. This man had a bizarre appearance and carried a treasured sword on his back. Knowing Liu was not home, he boldly entered the house. He barged into the room. The lady tried to flee but was caught by him. He threw her onto the bed, ignoring her fear. With a wave of his hand, her clothes instantly fell away. The lady knew he was one of the 5 demons, infamous for assaulting women. Though she pleaded desperately, she could not escape and was tormented by him all night. When Merchant Liu rushed home upon hearing the news, he was both heartbroken and terrified upon seeing his wife's condition. Every 10 to 15 days, the 5 demons would return to Liu's residence, leaving the lady utterly exhausted. In desperation, Liu called his younger brother for help. Seeing his sister-in-law's condition, Wukong asked what had happened, and the Liu couple recounted everything. That night, Liu arranged for Wukong to stay in a room near his sister-in-law's. In the middle of the night, Wukong could not sleep. He got up and practiced martial arts in his room while waiting for the demon to arrive. Suddenly, he heard heavy footsteps in the courtyard. An unfamiliar sound. Wukong peered through the window and saw a strange man enter his sister-in-law's room. Knowing the culprit had arrived, Wukong grabbed his sword and rushed to the room. Kicking the door open, he saw the demon forcing his sister-in-law to drink wine and furiously berated him. The demon, never having been treated this way before, immediately drew his sword and stabbed at Wukong. However, he did not know that Wukong was a highly skilled fighter. Wukong swiftly dodged and counterattacked. After a few exchanges, Wukong swung his sword with great force. The demon's head fell to the ground and his body instantly transformed into a dwarf horse. The Liu couple was terrified. The 5 demons were brothers. Now that one was dead, the others would surely seek revenge. Wukong instructed the Liu couple to hide, then extinguished the lights, and hid behind the window, bow drawn, waiting in ambush. Not long after, 4 figures descended from the sky into the courtyard. Using their psychic connection, they quickly realized their brother had been slain. Furious and filled with murderous intent, they stormed in for revenge. Wukong, hidden, fired an arrow. The powerful shot struck the leader in the chest, causing him to collapse. As the first demon stepped through the door, Wukong, waiting behind it, struck without hesitation. In a swift motion, before they could react, he decapitated him instantly. The remaining 2 demons, seeing that the person inside was not easy to deal with, panicked and fled. Upon closer inspection, Wukong realized the one he had decapitated was actually a pig. The one he had shot dead in the courtyard had also turned into a pig. The Liu couple ordered their servants to butcher the 2 pigs for a feast, and from then on, no one came seeking revenge. News of Wukong slaying the 5 demons spread quickly. A wood merchant, upon hearing the tale, brought gifts and came to seek help. He explained that he had a 16-year-old daughter. One day, while she was admiring flowers in the garden, a man suddenly descended from the sky. The man declared that he would return in 3 days to take her as his concubine, instructing the merchant to prepare. The merchant, unwilling to let his daughter fall into the demon's hands, sought out Wukong for aid. Wukong went to the merchant's house, disguised himself as the bride, and waited in the room. Right on schedule, the demon opened the door and entered. However, upon lifting the veil and seeing Wukong disguised as the bride, he was so frightened that he turned and fled. Wukong immediately gave chase, swinging his sword and severing one of the demon's arms. Following the trail of blood, Wukong pursued him to the riverbank outside the city, where he found a dead bird floating in the water, missing one wing. From that day on, only one of the 5 demons remained, but he never dared to cause trouble again. And thus, no more incidents of the 5 demons preying on women ever occurred. This strange but true story happened in the Lee family, where for 3 generations there had been only one male heir. In the household, only the mother and son depended on each other, enduring hardships and saving up to find a wife for Li An. The mother longed for her son to marry and have children to continue the family line. However, unexpectedly, the newlywed bride passed away within a year without any apparent cause. The mother was both heartbroken and worried. She had spent all her life savings to marry off her son, and now she had no means to arrange another marriage. On the 3rd day, just before the bride was to be buried, she suddenly sat up inside the coffin. Though she was said to have come back to life, her eyes were vacant and lifeless, like those of a ghost. Suddenly, she called out to her mother-in-law. Mrs. Lee was horrified at the sight, but at the same time, she was overjoyed that her daughter-in-law had come back to life. She hurriedly called Anne to help his wife back into the room. However, despite being revived, the bride lay stiffly in bed every day, neither speaking nor moving. After a few days, she gradually recovered, but she only recognized her mother-in-law and had no recollection of her husband. She claimed her name was Aki and that she had died at the age of 19. Since her lifespan had not yet ended, her soul had remained wandering in the underworld. After the bride of the Lee family passed away, Aki still had an unfulfilled wish. If she truly died, the Lee family would have no heirs, and her husband and mother-in-law would suffer great sorrow. She pleaded with the King of Hell to allow her to help the Lee family have descendants so that good people would not be left without an heir. The King of Hell was moved by her words, but since her own life had already ended, she could not be revived. However, he could still help her fulfill her wish. The King of Hell checked the records of life and death and saw that Aki's time in the human world had not yet run out. He permitted her to borrow the deceased bride's body to return to life and ensure the Lee family's lineage continued. After that, she was led by ghost envoys to recognize people, but since she had never seen anyone else before, she only recognized her mother-in-law. The mother and son of the Lee family looked at each other in confusion after hearing this, as the way she spoke and her mannerisms were completely different from before. And so, Aki remained in the Lee family as the daughter-in-law. Since his wife had returned, An became more cheerful and dedicated to taking care of the family. After living together for some time, Aki gradually accepted An. Relying on her memories, Aki was able to find her former home. After some explanation, her elderly father believed that his daughter had returned to life by borrowing another body, and he was overjoyed. He even spent money to host a grand wedding for the 2 of them. Not long after their marriage, Aki gave birth to a baby boy, bringing immense joy to the entire family. When the child turned 3, Aki said that the King of Hell had only granted her 3 years of life, and now that time was up, she had to leave. The next morning, just as she had said, she passed away in her sleep, and built a grave for his wife, and raised their son alone from then on.